Before we even begin, I want you to pause everything around you for just a moment. Because what you're about to hear is not just another video, not just another lecture, and definitely not another collection of feel-good quotes. No, this is a wake-up call, a reminder, a mirror held directly in front of the men who are tired of being disrespected, tired of being misunderstood, and tired of giving more than they ever get back. Today, I'll show you 5 simple but powerful ways to take back your self-respect without saying a word. But before we get there, let me ask you something real. How many times have you tolerated that sharp tone? How many times have you stood there, letting her talk over you in front of others while pretending it didn't bother you? How many times did you explain yourself when you shouldn't have? Or gave away your power thinking it was love? Because deep down, you already know the truth. These little moments are not little. They stack. They accumulate. They rot the foundation of who you are. And let me say this clearly. This video isn't for men who want to be liked. It's for men who want to be respected. Because once respect is gone, everything else becomes fake. Fake smiles, fake love, forced intimacy. A peace that feels more like walking on glass. No peace, no pride, no power. If you're ready to shift into a version of yourself that no longer tolerates emotional crumbs, comment, "I choose self-respect." Now let's get into the first and most powerful shift. Number 1, the silent stare. This is where the real transformation begins. There's a look a man gives when he's had enough. Not the explosive look of anger. Not the desperate look of a man begging to be heard. No, this stare is something deeper. A quiet, grounded awareness that says, "I've seen everything I need to see." It's the moment he realizes that from this point forward, his energy will not entertain disrespect, no matter who delivers it. Especially not from the one who once claimed to value him most, yet now tests him like he's a disposable option. She can reset her mood whenever she wants. She can switch from sweet to cold in a single breath. She can rewrite the rules whenever it benefits her. But this stare, your stare, interrupts that pattern. This deeply uncomfortable, still, unrushed moment where a man stops reacting and simply observes becomes the loudest confrontation he will ever deliver without raising his voice. Up until now, you've danced around her moods. You've bent yourself to avoid her attitude. You've swallowed your truth just to keep things calm. But the silent stare changes all of that. Because when you offer her nothing, no reaction, no justification, no emotional supply, you're sending a message louder than any argument ever could. I will no longer reward this behavior with attention. I will no longer trade my dignity for a spot in your life. I will no longer shrink to keep a peace that only exists when I obey your shifting standards. The stare is more than eye contact. It's a shift in your soul. It's the moment you reclaim your center. It's the moment you withdraw the approval she never earned. And trust me, she will feel it immediately, because now, something in you has changed. Something irreversible. Something final. Respect, once lost and tolerated, becomes a breeding ground for quiet resentment. And the longer a man tolerates disrespect, the more he begins to resent himself. Resent himself for staying quiet. Resent himself for letting his boundaries erode. Resent himself for mistaking manipulation for affection. But when a man finally gives that silent stare, he's not being passive. He's being powerful. He's letting his presence speak. He's letting his stillness expose the imbalance in the dynamic. He's letting her feel the shift she never expected. Women don't stop respecting men overnight. It happens slowly, quietly. Each time he laughs off an insult meant to belittle him. Each time he explains himself to someone who wasn't listening. Each time he tries to fix a problem that wasn't meant to be fixed, only meant to test him. Over time, she stops seeing the man and starts seeing the puppet. But the silent stare destroys that illusion. Because now, she sees something unfamiliar in your eyes. She sees a man who's done negotiating the value of his standards. A man who is no longer seeking permission to feel disrespected. A man who refuses to pretend this is love when every sign says otherwise. She sees that you see the pattern now. The subtle control, the passive digs, the shifting tones, the fake smiles in public, the coldness in private. And for the first time, she sits with her own discomfort without you rushing to fix it. Because the stare is not punishment. It's clarity. It's you saying, I see who you've become in this relationship, and I see who I became while tolerating it. This moment becomes a turning point. The moment you stop tolerating gaslighting disguised as communication. The moment you stop accepting mockery disguised as humor. The moment you stop responding to affection used as currency to buy your silence. What she sees in that stare isn't anger. It isn't hate. It's indifference. And indifference is the most painful reaction for someone who thrives on controlling the emotional atmosphere. Because now, she's no longer the center of your focus. You're grounded, calm, unmoved, watching, measuring. The silence removes the fuel from her behavior. And without fuel, it dies. This is where everything changes. She will either self-correct or reveal her true self more clearly. Either way, you win. Because the goal was never to change her. The goal was to return to yourself. The man who gave away respect piece by piece in exchange for temporary affection. Each time you swallowed your truth, each time you bent your values, each time you shrank to be tolerated. But now, you are done shrinking, done bending, done cutting parts of yourself just to fit into a smaller space. And this stare communicates all of that without a word. It is a silent declaration that the games are over, the tests are seen, and the standards are back. And that if she wants access to him, real access, emotional, physical, mental, then it will require something she has not been giving. Respect, consistency, humility. 3 things that cannot be faked. 3 things that cannot be demanded. They must be earned through behavior, not words. And if she cannot give that, then she will simply be allowed to exit. Not with anger, not with drama, not with a final argument. Just a calm acceptance that she no longer qualifies for the version of you she once took for granted. Because the days of tolerating mood swings disguised as personality, the days of letting sarcasm replace genuine communication, the days of tiptoeing around unpredictable reactions to maintain a fake peace, those days are over. And this new version of you does not announce boundaries through shouting. He enforces them through silence. A silence that is not confusion. It is intention. It is self-respect. It is the moment a man finally walks back into the center of his own life, stops negotiating with disrespect, and stops asking others to validate the truth he already knows. This is where real masculine strength begins. Not in how loud you can be, but in how deeply grounded you can remain when everything around you tries to shake your identity. And for any man watching this, for any man who has been disrespected subtly, repeatedly, painfully, you know this stare. You felt the urge to speak, to defend yourself, to demand clarity, but the words never came. Something inside you held them back. That wasn't weakness. That was instinct. Because deep down, you knew words wouldn't work. You knew explanations would be twisted. You knew logic would be ignored. You knew the conversation would be turned around until you became the villain in your own story. So instead of saying something, your soul told you to stop explaining, to stop arguing, to stop performing. And I'm telling you now, stop searching for the perfect words. You don't need them. Just look. Just hold the moment. Just let her feel the weight of her own behavior in silence. Because when she realizes that you see it, truly see it, everything changes. Now the game has rules. Now there is a line. Now she has to decide. Will she rise to your level, or will she exit your life? Either answer is acceptable, because for the first time, you have chosen you, not the illusion of peace, not emotional crumbs, not conditional affection disguised as love, but your dignity, your clarity, your power. And when that becomes your standard, you stop begging for respect and start attracting only what aligns with your worth. Not through persuasion, not through arguments, not through emotional explanations, but through the power of one silent look that says everything and so much more. Because when a man reaches that level of self-respect, when his silence speaks louder than every argument he used to have, that is when he becomes unshakable. That is when he becomes a leader of his own life, not controlled, not manipulated, not drained, led by clarity, guided by strength, protected by silence. That moment is exactly why we created the Stoic Relationship Blueprint, a powerful guide built on timeless psychological principles that will reshape the way you see yourself, your relationships, and your peace. And now it's available in audiobook form, so you can absorb every truth while driving, lifting, walking, or grounding your mind in nature. This isn't just a book, it's your compass, your armor, your reset button. The link is in the comments. Don't wait for another heartbreak. Don't wait for another year of disrespect. Don't wait for another wake-up call that comes too late. You already know it's time. Number 2, use silence as an answer. Here, the script deepens, and so will we. There comes a point where a man must stop explaining himself to people who listen only to argue, people who twist his words, flip his intent, and weaponize his emotions to feel powerful. And that point arrives when he realizes that every word he speaks in defense of his character is just another drop of fuel on a fire that shouldn't even exist. This is the moment when silence becomes not just a response, but a decision, a shift, a boundary, a psychological position of strength, especially in relationships where disrespect hides behind sarcasm, mocking, jokes, moods without explanation, accusations without evidence, and emotional games that keep him drained and confused. Men often think they must fix everything, that it is their job to patch every tear, solve every conflict, and win back respect through explanation. But they don't realize something crucial. Every time you stay and explain, you are rewarding the behavior. You are validating it. You are telling her it is effective. And this is where most relationships break a man. Not through big betrayals, but through 1,000 subtle cuts. Cuts dismissed with, "You're overreacting." Cuts denied with, "I didn't mean it like that." Cuts defended with, "You're too sensitive." Until he no longer knows whether he's in a relationship or emotional custody. This is where silence becomes the sword that separates manipulation from reality. When she throws a passive-aggressive line, you simply don't respond. Not out of anger, not out of ego, but out of clarity. Because silence forces her to sit with her own tone, her own intentions, her own words. And suddenly, her tactics don't land the way they used to. They don't get a reaction. They don't spark chaos. They don't control the emotional atmosphere. This is not coldness. This is clarity. This is emotional maturity. This is masculine groundedness. Because when you stop reacting to every attack, you remove the game. And when the game ends, so does her control over your emotional state. A man who learns this no longer speaks to be understood. He acts to be respected. And everything changes. Because not every comment needs a comeback. Not every insult needs a counter. Not every accusation needs a defense. Sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is pause, look, and say absolutely nothing. And in that pause, something shifts. She realizes her emotional weapons no longer work. The triggers she used to pull so easily no longer fire. The reactions she counted on are gone. And for the first time, she sees a version of you she can't manipulate, a version of you she can't predict, a version of you she can't control, a version of you she can't emotionally exhaust into compliance. That version of you is dangerous. Dangerous not because he is violent, but because he is untouchable. The man who embraces silence no longer fears distance. He no longer fears being misunderstood. He no longer fears walking away, because he finally understands something profound. Truth does not need to shout. Truth does not need to fight. Truth only needs to stand still. And when she realizes she can no longer provoke you into arguments you never started, she has only two choices. She changes, or she reveals she never respected you to begin with. Either way, your silence gives you the answer. Too many men stay trapped in conversations where the goal is not connection but control, where every word they say is used against them, where their calm is labeled avoidance, where their reaction is labeled aggression. You cannot win in a relationship where the rules change every time she loses control. So stop trying to win. Stop trying to pass tests that weren't meant to be passed. Stop trying to solve emotional puzzles designed to keep you confused. Just stop playing. Because silence is not running away. It is standing still while the noise burns itself out. And if she respects you, she will feel that shift instantly. She will notice. She will reflect. She will adjust. But if she doesn't respect you, she will escalate. She will push harder. She will test deeper. And that is your confirmation. That is your clarity. That is your signal to walk. Not argue, not plead, not deliver a final speech. Walk. Because if a woman pushes harder when you enforce peace, then she was never interested in peace. She was interested in power. And when she asks why you're distant, you won't owe her an explanation. You won't owe her closure. You won't owe her emotional labor, because the disrespect already said what needed to be said. You just chose to listen in silence instead of screaming back. And that is what makes your silence powerful. Not because it hides your feelings, but because it reveals your standards. It's not avoidance, it's awareness. It's understanding that your emotional energy is too valuable to be drained in battles you never started and have no interest in winning. And this goes beyond women. This is about life. Every man watching this has a limited reserve of time, attention, emotional bandwidth, mental clarity, spiritual strength, and if you waste it defending yourself to people who disrespect you, you will have nothing left for the mission that defines you. Nothing left for the goals that call you. Nothing left for the discipline that shapes you. Nothing left for the peace that heals you. This is where silence becomes a daily practice, a habit, a lifestyle chosen by the man who knows his path, the man who no longer gets pulled into emotional storms, the man who no longer proves his worth, the man who no longer negotiates his boundaries, the man who sees through the noise and simply refuses to participate in it. That man walks into rooms differently. He sits differently. He speaks less, listens more, and watches everything. Because he understands something other men don't. Control is not found in dominance. Control is found in restraint. The man who owns his decisions doesn't flinch when tested. He doesn't panic when misunderstood. He doesn't crumble under pressure. Because he knows silence is not the absence of response. Silence is the presence of control. And that presence, that steady, unshakable presence, is felt most deeply by those who once fed off your reactions, especially by those who knew exactly what to say to make you question yourself, to make you prove yourself, to make you beg for peace. But once those tactics stop working, the entire dynamic shifts. At first, it feels uncomfortable, foreign, different, because you're used to explaining, you're used to fixing, you're used to earning back affection through emotional acrobatics. But the moment you stop, the moment you choose yourself over chaos, everything changes. Yes, you may lose people. You may even lose her. But what you gain is a version of you that no longer depends on being liked to feel valuable. A version of you that no longer needs approval to feel worthy. A version of you that no longer trades self-respect for temporary peace. A version of you that moves with purpose instead of permission. And that version of you builds the life you were meant to live. Not a life of arguing. Not a life of apologizing for who you are. Not a life of walking on emotional eggshells. But a life of clarity, direction, purpose, strength, peace. And that life begins the moment you stop talking to those who don't hear you and start walking toward the discipline of silence, toward the clarity of presence, toward the strength that comes not from how loud you can speak, but from how little you need to. Number 3, set a clear boundary. A man without boundaries is not free. He is a tool, a resource, a battery waiting to be drained. And the worst part? Most men don't even realize it's happening. Because disrespect rarely arrives dramatically. It doesn't storm through the door shouting. It sneaks in quietly, disguised as small things. She cancels last minute. She makes fun of your goals. She interrupts when you're speaking. She throws attitude instead of clarity. She uses sarcasm instead of honesty. And you let it slide. Not because you're weak, but because you don't want to be seen as too serious, too emotional, too difficult, or too sensitive. But here's the truth. Every time you let it slide, you're teaching her how to treat you. You are telling her that your comfort is negotiable. Your values are flexible. Your dignity is on a leash that she can pull anytime her mood shifts. And slowly, quietly, you find yourself in a relationship where you can't speak freely, can't express needs without conflict, can't share your truth without backlash, can't exist without managing her emotional weather. You think keeping quiet is maintaining peace, but in reality, you're maintaining her control. This is how men lose themselves, not through dramatic betrayals, but through the slow erosion of self-respect. Not because they can't do better, but because they never demanded better. And here's the most painful truth. If your relationship requires you to abandon your boundaries to keep her, you don't have a relationship. You have a performance that drains you, a performance that transforms you into a watered-down version of yourself, a performance that eventually makes you resent her and resent yourself. And that resentment, that self-loathing that comes from living below your own standards, that is what destroys a man from the inside. But demanding better doesn't mean yelling, fighting, or arguing. It means being grounded enough to look her directly in the eyes when she crosses a line and say, with no fear, no anger, no shakiness, I don't allow this. And if it happens again, you walk. Not dramatically, not with shouting, not with threats, but with calm finality. The kind of finality that shakes her deeper than any emotional outburst ever could. Yes, this is hard. Yes, this is uncomfortable. Because men are taught their entire lives that their job is to sacrifice, compromise, adjust, adapt, tolerate. But what is the price of that? What is the price of keeping her happy if it costs you your clarity, your confidence, your direction, your self-respect? Boundaries do not punish her. Boundaries protect you. They define the terms of your presence. They clarify what is acceptable and what is not. They separate love from manipulation. A boundary says, this is what I tolerate. This is what I don't. If that doesn't work for you, that's okay. But I'm not bending to keep something that's already falling apart. And this terrifies most men because we're taught that boundaries equal abandonment. But the real abandonment is abandoning yourself to keep someone else. Here's another truth men avoid. If she leaves because you set a boundary, she was never with you. She was with what you gave her. And the moment that changes, she's gone. Not because you failed, but because you finally showed up. Better to be alone with your values intact than with someone who only stays when she gets her way. Because real love does not avoid boundaries. It respects them, cherishes them, grows through them. And here's the rule you must engrave into your mind. The moment you allow a pattern to repeat, it becomes your responsibility, not hers. If you find yourself explaining the same thing over and over, asking for the same respect, feeling like your needs are an inconvenience, then you don't have boundaries. You have hope. And hope doesn't protect you. Only standards do. Because once a woman sees you hesitate, once she sees you blink, Once she sees you tolerate what you said you wouldn't, your words become noise. Your expectations become suggestions. Your presence becomes routine. Not respected, not valued, just tolerated. And you cannot build love on tolerance. Love respects rules, not because it's forced to, but because it chooses to. If she values you, she will rise to meet your boundary. Not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently. And if she doesn't, then you have your answer. Not because she's evil, not because she's broken, but because she's not meant to stay. And you must be strong enough to accept that without hating her or hating yourself. Some people enter your life to teach you something, not to stay in it forever. And the only way to separate those who respect you from those who use you is to set the line and see who adjusts. Setting that line is scary because it means you might lose her, but if you don't set it, you will lose yourself. And that loss doesn't happen fast. It happens slowly. In the moments when you said yes instead of no. In the times you laughed to avoid conflict. In the apologies you gave for things you didn't do. In the sacrifices you made that she never appreciated. Piece by piece, you disappear. Until one day, you look in the mirror and don't recognize the man staring back. That is not love. That is self-abandonment. And not by her, by you. But today, that ends. Today, you draw the line, not through anger, not through control, but through deep respect for yourself, through a promise to your future, through a commitment to your own dignity. Because the only way to know who respects you is to give them something they cannot cross. Once you do, everything becomes clear. Who's there for you? Who's using you? And most importantly, whether you respect yourself enough to enforce the line. Because boundaries mean nothing without enforcement. And your boundaries are only as strong as your willingness to stand by them, even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, especially when it costs you something. That cost is the price of peace. And peace is only possible when you stop trying to control what stays and start protecting what's sacred. Your self-respect, your focus, your purpose. The man who guards these things cannot be manipulated because his boundaries are not threats. They are facts. Not conditions, but codes. They don't require explanation. They don't require negotiation. They don't require understanding, only observation. And the moment someone violates them, he doesn't argue, doesn't negotiate, doesn't escalate. He exits. Because the boundary was already clear, and now, so is he. Number 4, walk away without explaining. There comes a point in every man's life where he realizes something painful but liberating. Staying is more damaging than leaving. Trying to fix something that is clearly broken is no longer noble. It's self-destruction dressed as loyalty. And when a man gives chance after chance, when he listens to every apology, when he swallows every shift in tone, when he survives every silent treatment, when he tolerates every emotional power play, eventually he wakes up and he sees the truth with clarity. This isn't love. It's a cage decorated with flowers to make it feel pretty. And what's worse? The guilt he feels for even thinking about leaving, because he's been conditioned to believe that walking away without a dramatic explanation makes him the villain, the one who gave up, the one who abandoned the relationship, the one who didn't try hard enough. But here's the truth no one tells men. When the respect is gone, the relationship already ended. He just didn't realize it yet. And now that he does, every second he stays is a lie, a performance, a mask, a slow death of his identity. Walking away without explaining isn't cruel, it's clarity. It is a man saying with his actions, "My energy is no longer for sale. My presence is not a reward for disrespect. My love will not be held hostage by guilt." And this is where real masculine power lies, not in shouting, not in dramatic exits, not in begging to be heard, but in calmly removing yourself when the pattern repeats again and again. Because explanations become meaningless when actions don't change. And how many times must a man repeat himself before he realizes that the silence of her behavior is louder than any apology? This is when he learns something profound. He doesn't owe his exit to someone who dismissed his feelings. He doesn't owe closure to someone who disrespected his vision. He doesn't owe justification to someone who doubted his worth. If she truly cared, he wouldn't be in a position to consider leaving in the first place. The truth most people never say out loud is this: women do not respect a man who explains too much, who pleads to be understood, who breaks himself into smaller pieces to avoid upsetting her. Because when you do that, you're not loving her, you're fearing her. And love born from fear is not love at all. It is submission in disguise. Men have been taught that sacrificing themselves is noble, that silence in the face of disrespect is patience, that bending their standards is compassion. But patience has limits. Compassion has limits. Self-sacrifice has limits. And when those limits are crossed again and again, the right thing to do is not to explain harder. It is to exit sooner. When you walk away quietly, without the emotional performance she expects, without the dramatic speech she wants, something hits her deeper than anything you could have said. Because what shocks her is not your exit, it is your peace, your silence, your calm, your lack of need for her validation. That silence becomes louder than all the arguments combined, and that silence tells her everything she refused to hear before. Now you're gone, not with chaos, but with clarity. And it's that clarity that begins your healing. Because staying with someone who doesn't value you is like bleeding slowly. It doesn't kill you immediately, it drains you over time. It drains your strength. It drains your drive. It drains your passion. It drains your fire. Eventually, you become a shell of the man you once were. Always tired, always second-guessing, always hoping she will come around. But hope without change becomes a trap. And she doesn't have to change, not as long as you stay, because your presence is her permission. Once you understand that, everything becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. When you walk away, not from anger, not from weakness, but from clarity, you reclaim your life. You reclaim your identity. And the people who truly love you will never make you explain your boundaries. They will feel them, respect them, honor them. If she doesn't, you have your answer. Her relationship with you was always conditional, always performance-based, always about what she could extract, not what she could build. And you must be okay with that truth, even if it hurts. Because the man who is terrified of being alone will always stay where he is disrespected. But the man who values his peace more than another person's approval walks away without hesitation once the line is crossed. This isn't heartless. This is growth. Because real growth isn't just becoming stronger, it's removing yourself from the people who make you weak. Walking away sometimes requires no words, no speech, no explanation. Sometimes the greatest clarity comes in silence. And if she didn't respect you when you were there, she doesn't deserve a speech when you leave. If she wants to understand why you walked away, she can reflect on her actions, not your exit. Because the actions created the distance long before you created the space. Walking away is not revenge, it is healing. And healing doesn't need witnesses. Healing only needs a decision. A decision that hurts at first, because you cared, because you hoped, because you wanted things to be different. But the difference doesn't come from begging, it comes from walking. And the moment you take that first step away from what drained you, you will feel it. Your power returning, your clarity sharpening, your fire igniting, your soul standing up straight again. And you will remember who you are. The man who walks away without explaining walks with strength because he knows the truth. He doesn't need to explain why he left. He knows, and knowing is enough. Number 5. Let actions speak for you. There comes a point where every man must stop talking, stop negotiating, stop repeating himself, stop begging for understanding. Because no one respects a message that lives only in a man's mouth. And for far too long, men have believed that the way to earn back control, earn back appreciation, earn back love, earn back validation, is through explanation. Explaining their past, explaining their mistakes, explaining their intentions, explaining their emotions. But here's the harsh truth most men never realize. The more you talk, the more invisible you become. Because the people who already stopped respecting you aren't listening for truth. They're listening for loopholes, for weak spots, for angles to twist, for vulnerabilities to use. They're not trying to understand you. They're trying to dominate the narrative. And you cannot reverse that dynamic with words. You reverse it with movement. Because when you say less and do more, when you fall silent and begin to build quietly, when you stop telling her you're about to change, and instead become the change, that is when everything shifts. Not because you're proving anything to her, but because you're done wasting breath on people who never listened in the first place. This shift is not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not emotional. It's steady, patient, quiet, relentless. Like a man rebuilding himself brick by brick in the dark. Because rebirth doesn't happen in noise. Rebirth happens in silence, in your discipline, in your routine, in your consistency, in your refusal to quit. When you stop broadcasting your intentions and start living them, she feels the difference. She senses the distance. She notices the shift. Not because you are punishing her, but because your focus is no longer on proving your worth to someone who questioned it. This is where everything changes. Not because she suddenly respects you, but because you finally respect yourself enough to make her approval irrelevant. The man who reaches this level becomes unshakable. Not because he wins arguments, but because he doesn't show up to them. Not because he silences others, but because his presence silences the room. Every man watching this knows the feeling of talking to someone who twists everything you say, mocks your concerns, laughs at your pain, or ignores your efforts until they disappear. That is your proof. It was never your words that mattered. It was always your alignment. When your habits align with your standards, when your actions align with your values, when your silence aligns with your purpose, you become a different man. A man people cannot manipulate. A man women look at differently. A man the world responds to without you having to demand respect, because your behavior creates the rules. Rules that never need to be spoken. Rules like, you do not chase. You do not repeat yourself. You do not try to convince anyone of your worth. You do not beg for clarity, closure, or attention. You do not argue with disrespect. You do not negotiate with emotional chaos. When she crosses the line, you don't shout. You don't break down. You don't write paragraphs. You simply pull back, redirect, rebuild, and keep moving. And that shift, that silence, that refusal to argue, it hits harder than any speech because it shows her something she didn't expect. She is no longer in control of your focus. And once a woman loses a man's focus, she only has two possible reactions. She recalibrates, or she reveals who she really is. Either way, you win. Because the man who leads with action no longer needs to be chosen. He chooses himself first, every day, through what he does, how he speaks, how he lives, where he invests his energy, what he refuses to tolerate. And when you become this man, you stop needing closure. You stop needing apologies. You stop needing her to understand what she did wrong, because now, it doesn't matter. Now, you're building something she cannot take from you. Your discipline, your clarity, your physical strength, your spiritual grounding, your mission, your future. And the stronger those things become, the quieter you get. Not because you're cold, not because you're detached, but because you've evolved past trying to be heard by people who preferred the sound of their own disrespect. And this shift doesn't just apply to relationships, it applies to life. The world doesn't respect men who talk. The world respects men who do. Men who build something from nothing. Men who disappear for 6 months and come back unrecognizable. Men who stop explaining and start transforming. Not for revenge, not for attention, but because they finally realized something profound. The greatest apology you'll ever give is the one you owe to yourself. And that apology cannot be spoken. It must be paid in sweat, time, discipline, solitude, silence. If you're watching this right now, ask yourself, what would happen if I stopped explaining my goals, stopped explaining my boundaries, stopped explaining my standards, and simply started living them? The answer? Everything would change, because your actions would become a truth no one could deny. And in that truth, you become free. Not because people suddenly treat you better, but because you no longer need them to. That is when you start moving differently, talking less, watching more, keeping your peace sacred, letting the weaker version of you, the one who kept trying to be understood, die quietly. So the version of you that commands respect without saying a word can rise in silence. And once that man rises, nothing will ever be the same again. They don't want you to find this. They don't want you to wake up. They don't want you to break the patterns that keep you quiet, compliant, apologetic, and controlled. Society would rather you stay exactly where you've been, silent, broken, confused, always apologizing for having standards, chasing love that disrespects you, wasting years you will never get back. But if you're still here, still watching, still listening, then you already know something deep inside you has shifted. Because a man who finishes this message is not the same man who started it. A man who reaches this point is a man who has finally had enough. Enough of disrespect. Enough of emotional games. Enough of bending while everyone else stays rigid. Enough of losing pieces of himself just to keep others comfortable. You're done with that life. You're done explaining. You're done chasing. You're done begging for understanding from people who enjoyed misunderstanding you. You're done settling for a relationship that felt more like walking through a minefield than building a future. The Stoic relationship blueprint is the guide they never wanted you to hold. Because once you understand these principles, once you understand psychology, once you understand masculine emotional mastery, you become someone who is impossible to control. This blueprint is filled with timeless truths, not motivational fluff, not recycled cliches, but deep psychological rewiring that will permanently change how you see yourself, relationships, boundaries, connection, emotional power, respect, peace. It's crafted for men who are ready to stop explaining and start leading. Men who are tired of being drained by relationships that sabotage their purpose. Men who are tired of being manipulated by moods and weaponized affection. Men who want relationships built on stability, not chaos. Consistency, not confusion. Truth, not tactics. And now, it's even easier for you to absorb everything, because the audiobook is out. You can listen while walking, while training, while driving, while cleaning, while grounding your mind, transforming yourself in moments that usually slip away. This isn't just a book. It's your compass, your protection, your mirror, your map for rebuilding self-respect from the inside out. The link is in the comments. Don't wait for another heartbreak. Don't wait for another disappointing year. Don't wait for another painful wake-up call. You already know it's time. Comment, I choose clarity. Because clarity is the beginning of power. Clarity is the beginning of peace. Clarity is the beginning of becoming a man who lives life on his terms, not on the conditions set by someone else's emotions. If you're ready to claim your copy, if you're ready to reclaim your identity, If you're ready to walk into your next chapter with dignity, boundaries, and emotional strength, then like this video, subscribe to this channel, and help more men escape the trap before it's too late. You are not the man you were when you started this video. You're stronger, you're clearer, you're awake. And from this day forward, your silence, your standards, and your actions will speak louder than your words ever did. Welcome to Dark Psychology. Amelia.